The morning sun cast a golden hue across the small town as Emma stepped out of her modest apartment, clutching her old canvas shopping bag. She lived alone in a quiet corner of the city, where people mostly kept to themselves. The world had changed a lot since her younger days, but one thing remained the same: people looked at her differently. No matter how many years had passed, their eyes always lingered on the scars. Emma's car was a rusted blue sedan, almost as tired as she was. The moment she sat in the driver's seat, she took a deep breath, glancing at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her hazel eyes were warm, but tired. The burn scars stretched across the left side of her neck and down her arm, discolored, raised, and impossible to hide. She started the engine with a sigh and drove to the local grocery store. It was a Saturday morning, and the parking lot was full of families and young people hurrying toward their routines. Emma carried herself quietly, keeping her eyes down as she entered the automatic doors. Inside, the store was busy. The scent of fresh bread mixed with the chatter of shoppers and the squeaking of carts. Emma moved slowly toward the produce section, carefully picking up a few apples. She placed them gently into a small paper bag, her sleeve slipping slightly and revealing more of her burned skin. She tried to pull it back down, but not before two teenage girls nearby noticed. One of them, wearing a bright pink shirt and heavy makeup, nudged her friend and pointed. "Oh my God, look," the girl whispered loudly. "Her arm, did you see that? That's disgusting." The other girl snorted and giggled, loudly enough for Emma to hear. "She looks like something out of a horror movie." Emma paused. Her face flushed, not with shame, but pain. She didn't meet their eyes. She merely clutched the apples closer and turned to walk away, her heart pounding. She forced herself to keep breathing, reminding herself that she'd been through worse. Much worse. As she moved to the dairy aisle, she overheard them still laughing behind her, mocking her like she was some sideshow. She wished they would stop. She wished she could disappear. At the milk section, Emma reached for a carton and placed it into her cart. A young mother nearby glanced at her scars, then quickly pulled her young child closer as if Emma were dangerous. The child, a little boy, looked at Emma curiously, but his mother hissed, "Don't stare. Let's go," and hurried away. Emma stood there for a moment, feeling the sting of rejection in a place as ordinary as a grocery store. Her scars, which once saved someone's life, were now something that made people recoil. She swallowed hard, blinking away the rising tears. As she continued toward the canned goods, a group of young men walked past her. One of them pretended to bump into her cart deliberately, making her step back in surprise. "Watch where you're going, lady," he sneered. Then he laughed with his friends. Man, her face, what a freak. Emma tightened her grip on the cart. For a brief second, a memory flashed through her mind: bright flames, screams, medic kits, bodies on the ground, a helicopter overhead. She had seen horror, and survived it. The same scars people mocked were once symbols of hope in the battlefield. She reached the checkout lane, hoping to get out quickly. The cashier was a young man with a bored expression. As Emma placed her items on the belt, he glanced up at her and hesitated. His gaze lingered a second too long on her scars before he gave a stiff, uncomfortable smile. Behind her in line stood a well-dressed man in a sharp gray suit. He tapped his foot impatiently and muttered loudly enough for everyone around to hear. "Some people really shouldn't walk around looking like that. It's upsetting. Especially in public places." Emma didn't respond. She felt her throat tighten, but she kept her head down. She pulled out her wallet with trembling fingers. The cashier avoided eye contact as he scanned the groceries quickly, embarrassed but silent. "That'll be $24.60, he mumbled. Emma handed him the money, hands shaking slightly. She could feel the eyes of other customers burning into her back. She placed everything into her bag carefully and whispered, "Thank you," before walking toward the exit. As she neared the door, the store manager, a middle-aged woman with stern eyes and folded arms, stood nearby observing the crowd. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Emma. "Excuse me," the manager called out as Emma passed. Emma turned slowly. "Yes." The manager looked her over briefly and frowned. "I don't mean to be rude, but some customers have complained. Maybe next time, consider wearing long sleeves. You might make others uncomfortable." Emma's heart sank. She let out a shaky breath, nodded without a word, and stepped into the parking lot. The moment the doors closed behind her, she stood still in the sunlight, holding her bag against her chest. The world seemed so cruel sometimes. She walked slowly to her car, each step feeling heavier. She loaded the groceries into the back seat and placed her hands on the steering wheel without starting the engine. For a few moments, she sat there silently, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The laughter echoed in her head. The stares. The whispers. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw flashes of her past, soldiers in pain, explosions, the smell of smoke, the screams of the wounded. She remembered crawling through fire to reach a wounded comrade. She remembered shielding a young soldier with her own body as debris rained down. That's how she got these scars. Scars she had earned by saving lives. A small tear slid down her cheek. She wasn't ashamed of her scars. She was ashamed of how society treated them like something ugly. She took a deep breath and wiped her face. She whispered to herself, "They don't KN." The next morning, Emma woke up early, still carrying the heaviness of yesterday's humiliation. There was a dull ache in her heart, but she refused to let it keep her indoors. Something inside her whispered that her life still mattered, that maybe kindness still existed somewhere. She decided to visit her favorite local coffee shop, a small cozy place with wooden floors and soft music, called Harbor Cafe. It was a quiet corner of town where she felt a little safer, like she could breathe normally for a moment without all the judging eyes. She wrapped a light cardigan around herself, though it didn't hide everything. She didn't want to hide today. Not entirely. As Emma opened the cafe door, a warm bell chimed. The air inside smelled of fresh coffee beans and pastries. A few small groups of people chatted peacefully at their tables. But one group stood out. At a large table near the center sat 5 men and 1 woman, all in military uniform, with medals pinned over their hearts. Emma instantly recognized the energy around them, straight posture, steady eyes, familiar brotherhood. They were soldiers. Veterans, most likely. They were celebrating someone's return, judging by the small congratulations banner on the wall behind them. Emma felt a mix of comfort and sadness. She had once been part of a group like that. She had once worn that uniform too, proudly. She quietly approached the counter and ordered a simple black coffee. "Name?" the barista asked. "Emma," she replied softly. She took her coffee and went to sit by the window, alone. She wrapped both hands around the warm cup, staring at the steam rising. For a moment, she forgot the world around her. But when her cardigan sleeve slid back slightly for a moment, the tattoo on her upper arm was visible. The faded emblem was clear, Medical Unit 80, U.S. Army. The ink was still bold despite the years. She looked at it for a second and gently traced her finger over it, remembering the friends she'd lost. Suddenly, she heard a chair scrape loudly from across the cafe. One of the soldiers from the group had stood up abruptly, eyes fixed on her like he'd just seen a ghost. He was tall, maybe in his late 30s, with short cropped hair and quiet strength in his face. Emma looked up, unsure why he was staring. He walked toward her slowly, almost hesitating with emotion. "Ma'am. I'm sorry to bother you," he said, voice trembling slightly. "But, that tattoo. Were you part of the 80th Medic Unit? In Afghanistan?" Emma stared at him, her lips parted in shock. She nodded slowly. Yes, she whispered. I was a combat medic. 80th Division. 2013 deployment. The man blinked rapidly, trying to maintain his composure. His fellow soldiers had all turned to watch, silenced. I'm Staff Sergeant David Turner, he said quietly. My brother was Private First Class Michael Turner. Emma gasped softly. Her hands trembled. Michael Turner. I remember him. I was with him when. Her voice cracked. David's eyes filled with tears instantly. He pulled out a small, folded photograph from his pocket, the kind soldiers carry in their chest. Michael talked about you in his letters. About how brave you were. He said he survived the ambush because of a medic named Emma who dragged him out of the fire. Emma's own eyes watered. It was as if the world had stopped moving around them. David's voice broke as he spoke. He didn't make it in the end. But he always called you his guardian angel. You tried to save him. You risked your life, you saved others too. Emma's breath shook. She looked down at her scars again, but for once, she didn't feel ashamed. These were wounds of war, of sacrifice. The other soldiers stood up from their table, walking toward them slowly. One by one, they recognized the unit tattoo, and their expressions changed from surprise to deep respect. One of them, a woman with strong arms and a captain's badge, stepped forward. You were with the 80th. We lost many brave folks in that deployment. You're a hero. Another soldier spoke, voice reverent, we owe you. People like you saved our brothers and sisters. Emma's hands covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. She shook her head gently. I'm not a hero. I was just doing my duty. David placed a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder, his voice soft but firm. Duty or not, you carried wounded soldiers through fire. You saved my brother's life for a few extra days. You gave him a chance to say goodbye. That means everything. The cafe had gone completely silent. Even the baristas and customers had stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold. At that moment, the door opened, and the same suited man from yesterday's grocery store walked in. He stopped when he saw Emma surrounded by soldiers. He stared in surprise and confusion as the uniformed men all saluted her. David stepped back, bringing his hand to his forehead in a firm salute. We honor you, ma'am, he said loudly enough for all to hear. For your service. And for your sacrifice. Emma shook with emotion, overwhelmed. The entire shop watched as this once ordinary, scarred woman was treated with the utmost respect. The suited man's mouth hung open, shame coloring his face. He stepped back, suddenly realizing how horribly he had misjudged her. The cafe owner hurried forward with a free slice of pie and said gently, Ma'am, your coffee and anything else today is on the house. Thank you for your service. Emma's tears turned to a soft smile, full of both sadness and relief. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. One of the soldiers asked politely, May we sit with you? Emma nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I'd be honored. They pulled chairs around her table as though she were a guest of honor. She shared memories of the battlefield, some painful, some filled with bittersweet laughter. They listened with respect and admiration. Before leaving, David placed the photo of his brother in her hand and said, Keep it. It belongs with you. Emma held the photograph close to her heart. For the first time, her scars didn't feel like shame, they felt like proof that she had lived with purpose. Moral lesson. Never judge someone by their appearance. Behind every scar or mark is a story of survival, courage, and sacrifice. True beauty lies in the battles you've overcome, not in how perfect you look. Respect others, because you never know the weight they carry or the lives they may have touched.